Hey there guys, it's Josh here from the future. Just before we get into today's video, I've got a really quick announcement. So as you guys know, I'm a commissioned painter and I finally got myself a website that's coming along very soon. It's going to have my gallery on there with all the previous stuff I've done, along with a bit more information about how the process works, and also if you want to get in touch with any inquiries, it's easier just to do it there. So if you're interested, let me know and I'll put a link below. You can in the comments below or check me out on the website and we can have a talk about that and you can learn a bit more about how that works. Anyway, on with the video. Hello there and welcome back to JJ Painting. I am JJ. As you can tell from today's title, we are going to be keeping up with the codexes. Now, what I mean by that is that codexes definitely come around a lot quicker than they used to, and I'm sure, like me, a lot of you out there have been a little bit surprised at how many Space Marine codexes we've had in the last couple of years and other codexes that have come around. So here's my tips and a few thoughts I have on codexes and how rapidly they're coming around, and this is how best to keep up with them and how to keep track of if your army is affected by this or if your army is less affected by this, but hopefully you'll find this useful. And today we're going to be painting this little model right here. Yep, have a look at that. Cool, innit? So, without further ado, let's crack on. So unfortunately, the first thing I'm going to do is play devil's advocate here a little bit, and that is that updating codexes quite regularly is actually quite good in a business sense for GW. Now, I know, please don't hit that dislike button, there's a good reason for this. First of all, it means that the rules themselves for those armies are updated more frequently. It does keep people more engaged with the hobby overall. It is easier as well to get new people into the hobby because if the rules have been updated within the past 6 months to a year and someone new enters the hobby or returns to the hobby, it's easier for them to know that the codex is being updated quite regularly. However, I do understand that this does cause frustration for a lot of people seeing codexes coming up very frequently. Now, I think the biggest example here, the main example obviously, is the Space Marines. The core Space Marine Codex has been updated incredibly frequently for the last couple of years. In fact, I think it's had an update pretty much every year since 2017, apart from 2018 now. That's a lot of codexes in a very short amount of time. I suspect, and this is just speculative, that the reason that's happened is the Primaris range was a massive factor. They couldn't put the whole thing in without models to release in the first codex, otherwise we'd probably still have that one. But at the same time, because they've released the Primaris range in stages, so the first stage was the Dark Imperium release with a few bits and pieces, then there was the Shadow Spear release with the things that came around that, and most recently we've had the Indomitus release with things that came around that. But as a result, what it has meant is that the game system itself has also been updated with 8th to 9th, but it meant that there were so many more things added to that Space Marine Codex, which hasn't happened before. So whether or not that was intentional or if it was an accident, it means that Space Marine players have had to buy 3 codexes pretty much every year back to back, and that is frustrating. Chaos Marines have had to get 2, Necrons have also had to get 2. But to be fair to the other 2 races, and all the rest of them, they haven't had to have their codexes updated with quite that much frequency. So if you're playing things like Imperial Knights, Genestealer Cult, Harlequins, Craftworld Eldar, Orcs, Imperial Guard, Astra Militarum, then you're still playing with the same codex you got when 8th edition first arrived. And for 3 years and a new codexes to start rolling around, that's a pretty average amount of time. There is definitely a disproportionate difference in terms of certain armies getting updates every year, like the Space Marines, and codexes that in the past have gone nearly 10 years without getting a codex update, and I'm talking very specifically about Orcs and Dark Eldar here many years ago. But the difference there is obviously Space Marines are a leading product, whereas those 2 aren't. But that's not to say that for the people playing those armies, it's not frustrating. Now, having said all that, and now I'm sure having annoyed some of you, I want to talk to you about a few other things, both my own insights and a bit of advice to dealing with, new codexes and things like that. The first thing is that codexes overall do come around more quickly than they did when I first started playing. Before, like I said with the example of Dark Eldar and Orcs, you could be waiting nearly a decade, maybe half a decade, before you'd see a new codex with certain armies come through. Now they are reliably coming around a lot quicker, which I'd say is a good thing. It means that people who've been playing armies for many, many years aren't stuck with the same thing over and over again. But on the flip side of that as well, I understand that there is a bit of anxiety because obviously you don't know how your army is going to change from one edition to the other. That's things like points, things in the force organization, how certain things, work overall. But I'd like to say two very important things. The way 40k is now compared to how it was back in previous editions is different enough that we shouldn't be this worried about it. First of all, I've noticed that the codexes from one edition to the next don't have the same drastic jump between them. So in the past, you would see entire units be put into a codex and then they disappear off the face of the earth, never to be seen again in the next codex. Entire rule sections, entire ways of shaping your army list would be in one edition of a codex, and then they'd be gone by the next one. Now that does cause a lot of anxiety for players, because obviously that means that their armies have been either wiped out or reduced to the point where they are no longer playable. It's frustrating and it's worrying. And I think that's something which a lot of players, especially from when I started playing, do carry with them a little bit when it comes to hearing about new codex. It's not just going, are we going to get any new models? It's going, well, how does this affect my army negatively? And I don't think that's something which we should be focusing on. I think we should be always thinking new codexes mean new rules, new opportunities to play the game, new ways of playing, new ways of seeing your army, that sort of thing. Those are good things in my opinion, and I think that's what we should be focusing on. But here's another thing to help allay your minds a little bit. Because the things don't change as drastically, because we now have very fundamental changes to the Force organization list, the other thing I've noticed is that codexes nowadays seem to add more than take away. I'm going to use the example here of Dark Eldar and Chaos Space Marines. Chaos Space Marines, from their 3.5 codex to their 4th edition codex, which then became their 5th edition codex as well, they had so much taken out. They lost all their Legion traits, they lost a lot of their special abilities, a lot of psychic abilities, relics, everything. All the things that helped people customize and reinvent their armies were gone. And that was, I think, a bit of a blow to some people. But at the same time, we don't see that anymore. We don't see things being stripped out of the codexes left, right, and centre, leaving you with a bare bones codex to play with very little in it. We see things being added to them all the time, especially now that we have things like stratagems, unique force organisation charts, and because the rules are now more devolved into each codex than they have been in previous editions, it means that every army's uniqueness is something which they're holding on to much more consistently. Because there's no universal special rules, every army is getting more unique models. I think Death Guard are a really good example of this, because they now have their own codex. They get their models updated. They're not just being rolled into the Chaos Space Marine Codex and losing a load of stuff. They are keeping what they have, and they're adding to that, which is really good for them. So I don't think we need to worry about what we're going to lose with each codex coming out. I think, to be honest with you, we will now be able to look at what we're going to gain. New codex releases are going to be bringing contributions. They're not going to be messing with our armies that exist, and they're not going to be completely hobbling our way of playing. And that's something I think we need to bear in mind. However, I do have a few tips to help keep up with codexes as they release. Now, the first thing with this is know which armies you own that are likely to get their codexes, or battle tomes, in the case of Age of Sigmar, updated more frequently. Now, Space Marines is the really obvious one here, but there are a few more which do crop up from time to time. The next most frequent one, I believe, is Chaos Space Marines, and then after them, especially in the last 10 years, have been Dark Eldar, Necrons, Demons, I believe. I'm not sure, but I'm fairly certain Demons get updated quite frequently. Now, the thing to remember about those codexes is those are the ones that get updated most frequently, but even then, apart from Space Marines, they do still largely get a bit of time in between each update, which is a good thing for those armies. So if you aren't playing with any of those armies, then there's a better than good chance you will always have a few years in between playing games. Another thing, as a side note, that I've realised is that a lot of people don't get to play as many games of 40k as I'm sure they'd like to. So it may feel like the gaps in between the codexes feel smaller, because compared to when you start playing the hobby to where we are now, this is definitely true for me. I play less 40k than I want to, so every single codex release for armies that I play suddenly feels a lot smaller, and I feel like I get less out of my codex overall. So there is always the argument of, unless you're playing, every week, or you're getting at least 2 games in, a month, then you may not necessarily feel like you're getting value out of your codex. Now, one of the obvious things with that is do the best you can to play more 40k. If you can't do that, that's a bit of a shame, but ultimately, I think that's just sometimes the way life goes, unfortunately. If you do get a chance to play more 40k, I'd always take it, because then you will get more value out of your codex and get to explore all of it. But the next point I want to make, getting back on topic, when a new codex comes out, ask yourself the question, are you still engaged with the army you have? Because if you don't want to buy the codex, you don't have to, especially if you have other armies that you're more interested in pursuing. I had this happen to me a couple of years ago. I had Orcs for many, many years. I have Imperial Guard for many, many years. But I stopped playing Orcs. And I didn't buy their 7th edition Codex. And I sold my entire Orc army a couple of years later because I didn't buy that Codex. I didn't feel like I missed anything. I got rid of it and I felt no regrets whatsoever. There was an Imperial Guard and a Space Marine Codex. I played both of those games that I both missed simply because I wasn't playing with them at the time. I didn't feel like I needed to get them when they were released. And surely enough, the next Codexes came around. I didn't feel like I missed anything. Now, that's not really saying much for Space Marines because you can, if the last couple of years have been anything to go by, you can not buy a Space Marine Codex for 12 months and you're fairly likely to get an update anyway. But, I don't think that's going to be a trend that continues past the end of this year, to be honest with you, because I feel like they've added as much to the range as, well, famous last words. I feel like if they keep adding to the range as they are now, eventually they're going to run into a little bit of trouble anyway. But one of the things about the Space Marine Codex is again, Primaris, whole new range, released in installments in the Space Marine Codex. Sticking to the Codex format they've kept with Space Marines has really been the thing that's let them down. But that's a bit of a tangent. But it might be a good time to also focus on new armies or armies that you're playing with elsewhere. And armies that you're not playing with, you can leave for the time being. The other thing to remember is that even after a codex has been announced, your current codex is still good for a little while afterwards. You don't necessarily have to drop your current codex to start thinking about the new one, because it hasn't been released yet. If you can still get a couple of games in with your current codex, then I would highly recommend doing that and encourage it, because it means you will get a little bit more out of that codex, and you will remind you maybe why you like the game. In fact, like I was saying earlier, it's a good time to take stock as to whether or not you want to keep playing with that army or not. And if you play that last game with that codex, and you really do realise that this army is no longer for you, then that's a good way to move on from it and know that you've not really wasted any more time or effort or energy on continuing with an army that you don't really feel anything about. Or if you want to take a step back from it and focus on other things, then that's also a good thing. Now, the last thing I want to say on this thing is, if you do want to keep playing with your old codex after the new ones have been released, then you can in friendly games. Not tournaments, obviously, maybe not in Games Workshop, but that's their store, that's their rules. Keep with your old codex until such time as you want to get the new one, especially if you aren't going to be able to get hold of a new codex and you don't want to restructure your army list. If you're playing with friends, I'm sure most of them will be quite happy for you to do that. And as a side note, bonus thing here, it's very interesting what happens when you start stacking up codexes. I saw a game which was quite large. It had 4 players in either team. 3 of the players were playing Chaos. And this was in 7th edition, so this was quite a while ago. And they had stacked all the codexes. So one person was playing with 3.5, one person was playing with 4th edition, and one person was playing with the 6th edition codexes. So that's 3 different editions of codexes that all played in 40k. And they all actually were still able to play by the rules of the current system. This was 2016, I believe, 2015, 2016. They were all still playing by the rules of the system of the time, and they were quite happy just to carry on with how they were doing it, and it was really interesting to watch. It was a bit confusing for the people playing against them, but they were able to do it and do it quite successfully. So that's a bit of an experimental way of playing as well, if you want to do that, if that's remotely interesting to you. So, to conclude, new codexes, I think, should not be a cause of anxiety. They should be exciting for us because armies getting updated is a good thing. Things that we don't like about our codexes or things that we do like about our codexes may come and go, but they do need to be updated and they do need to evolve. Because people who've been playing the game for a while do remember a time, like I said, where codexes weren't getting updated that regularly and you could go many years without seeing any updates. It is very easy to think of it in those terms, but then think about how drastic those changes were. Those changes don't come quite as massively as they did before. And I think it is also to remember that the era of that codexes is well and truly over. Hopefully nowadays they will stick to regular updates, which ultimately cost us less. Because the important thing to remember is that when those long periods of time would pass by, that would often come with a massive new release of models, which would end up costing you far more money. The last couple of releases for Space Marines, especially if you were playing Firstborn, maybe not Primaris for obvious reasons, you could buy all 3 of those codexes from 2017 to 2020 and you wouldn't have to spend a penny on any new models, because whilst points went up and down and things within the rules did change, some of them quite fundamentally, they never took anything out of the Codex or away from the Codex, which made your army unplayable. You could also argue the same for Chaos Space Marines, who had 2 Codexes in the space of 2 years. Their Codex was not unplayable. A lot of things which were in there stayed the same. A few things were added, but nothing was taken away. So that's the thing I think to remember. To keep up with Codexes, it's a good time to take stock. It's a good time to decide if you want to keep playing. But don't worry, because your army is going to be fine, and you should still be able to play with it the way you want, because thankfully we can do that more easily now than we could when I first started playing. But I want to give the last word over to you again. Tell me, what was your favourite edition? What Codexes were your favourites? Do you believe that the things that you loved about the Codexes when you first started playing with those armies is still in your army, or has it changed into something else? I'm genuinely interested to know your opinion. Please, get in touch. I'd like to hear your thoughts. Cool, so there we go. That's my thoughts on keeping up with the new Codexes and army books, I suppose, as they come out. But thank you all very, very much for watching. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Like, subscribe, all that good fun YouTube shilly stuff. And of course, check the link below for stuff about the new website and my new services as well. But again, thanks for watching, goodbye, and have a lovely day.